Hi, everyone. Well, thanks so much for joining on this snowy day. And so I'll get right into this. I was asked to present on expanded access for single patients. And I have had the opportunity to work on these and shepherd them through to succession 6 times in the last about year and a half. And so I guess that's why I was asked to present on this. So Kristen Bussey, a pharmacist here who is a faculty member in our pharmacy school and also one of the chairs of the IRB. She presented last year, so you may remember her presentation, and she kindly offered that I could share that presentation again this year. I shared it as one of the resources. So there are many resources, and I'm looking over here on my other screen. There are many resources that are in the box files. So if you don't know how to get to the box files, then please reach out to Sarah, and she can help you with that. And I discovered some other really good ones when I was preparing for this presentation. So unfortunately, I don't think Kristen is able to join today, but Catherine Warzala is, and she is in the Department of Medicine and works with adult expanded access. And so she offered to come on, and then also Dr. Broglie, a pediatric oncologist who I've worked with. She and several of her colleagues are the ones who I have assisted with getting these patients the drugs that they need that may be life-saving for them. So I'll move on to the objectives. So many of us are research coordinators, so we already know what a clinical trial is. But the goal is that you'll understand what's different about emergency use and non-emergency use single patient INDs, and that stands for new drug is what it stands for. So the second goal is to identify and locate documents and resources for the FDA submission and the emergency use single patient IND. Third, identify and locate documents and resources related to the submission and submission support, and understand the reporting requirements, because there are reporting requirements after you submit to the FDA, get the acknowledgement letter back, submit to the IRB, depending on what order you're doing it in. So there are some requirements. So clinical trial is a systematic investigation of a medicinal product intended to obtain information about safety, effectiveness of the product. So that's something that's very rigorous. Each patient that is put into the trial has to follow the same route, and it can be different size number of patients in the trial. But it's very strict guidelines as far as what the procedures are. Whereas expanded access, and I'm specifically going to be talking about single patient, but there are a couple other types. It used to be called, and still by many people is called, compassionate use, but I have a red line through here because compassionate use is not a term that is in the regulations in the United States. And it is confusing to use that, because some people will think that there's a separate arm by which patients can get drugs outside of a clinical trial that are not yet approved on the market. And so, but there is not a compassionate use route. It's through expanded access. And I'll go into the next slide and to show further what I'm talking about. But it's important to know that expanded access is not research. There are several similarities, but it is considered treatment. And so that's important to remember when you get to the point of submitting the IRB. eBridge workflows is that it's a treatment and it's not research. So the requirements, this is the government Code of Federal Regulations requirements for all expanded access use. It needs to be intended to treat a serious or immediate life-threatening disease or condition, and there is no comparable or satisfactory alternative therapy to diagnose, monitor, or treat the disease or condition. And also the potential benefit must outweigh the risks of the treatment use. And those risks are not unreasonable in the context of the disease or the condition being treated. So if we think about it, a patient in the cases that I have shepherded, the patient has already had a lot of chemo. They may have graft versus host disease. So they are very sick. So what we would consider risks for someone without cancer and without having these treatments is different than someone who has been through a lot of treatments. So, and then providing the investigational drug, this is very important, that it will not interfere with the start, conduct, or completion of a clinical trial that's already going on or multiple clinical trials. So it's important that before a physician puts through the paperwork to request single patient expanded access, that they've looked or they've had an assistant look or checked with the pharmacy to see, is there something else available for this patient through a clinical trial. So as I said, there are three types of expanded access. So there's single patient expanded access, which I'll be talking about, intermediate size, and treatment population. So as the terms mention, intermediate size would be multiple patients going through the same protocol. Most often, a drug manufacturer will be the one who submits an intermediate size proposal to the FDA, and also for treatment population. So the single patient route is the route that our physicians, the ones that I've been working with in pediatric oncology, have used. We would like to get to an intermediate size population for one or two of the drugs. However, it's a little bit outside of the scope of this presentation, but if you think about the manufacturer, they're the ones that produce the drug. They likely have clinical trials going on, or did have in the past. And so they hold the INDs usually for these. This is their baby, basically. So if there's going to be multiple patients being treated outside of a clinical trial, they still want to keep control of that. So there may be situations, there have been a few situations where a physician can work with the drug company and open an intermediate size protocol, but it's not very common that I'm aware of. So getting back to the single patient route, which is what I'm talking about today, there are two types: emergency use and non-emergency use. And I have an asterisk down here because it's very important to remember as far as time, and time is always sensitive. It's important. It's of the essence. When a physician has a drug, found out that there's a drug that might possibly save the patient's life or mitigate their disease quickly, that the single patient application is the only way that the protocol can be deferred to the chair for review. So that means a quick turnaround. So these intermediate sized populations and treatment population protocols, they go through the regular IRB review. So that's important to remember. And as I said, I'm going to be talking about these today that are in the red box. And I also, if you want to refer back to the presentation at a later time, I have a link here. This is a very good website to get additional details on the different type of expanded access. So if you have questions during the presentation, please feel free to put them in the chat and we will address them at the end. I realize it's a lot of information, especially if this is the first time you're listening to this. So no question is a dumb question, basically, because we all had to start somewhere to learn. So for these single patient treatments, and these are treatments and not research, there's additional criteria that need to be met. So as I said, the physician must determine that the probable risk does not exceed that of the disease for the patient. So we don't want to make them even sicker than they are already, and certainly don't want them to die. And then the FDA must determine if the patient cannot obtain the drug under another IND or protocol. So when the physician or the team submits the application to the FDA is still going to do a search to see if there's another way that the patient can obtain the drug. And they have experts there that also know a lot about the conditions, so they will give advice if they think it's not the safest route to go. Additional safeguards. So the treatment is generally limited to a single course of therapy. So when you apply to use a drug outside of a clinical trial that is not already available on the market, it's generally a single course. However, sometimes a treatment that has been, maybe there's a case report that's been published, or maybe there was a clinical trial where there was some efficacy, but it didn't reach the threshold that the FDA approved it. Here in the United States, we've seen that happen. Perhaps it's approved in Canada or Europe, but not here. If there's published literature that shows that multiple courses using this drug may benefit the patient, then the FDA can and does sometimes approve multiple courses for a single patient. So for instance, let's say it's monthly therapy for 6 months, but generally the FDA guidance says it's generally a single course. But it's very good that you don't have to go back to the FDA if there's published literature and they do approve the whole the multiple courses. You don't have to go back and request an application each time. So, and then when quite a few patients have gone through the single patient expanded access route, then the FDA may go to the drug company and say, okay, it's time for you to open an expanded access, or have you considered opening an intermediate expanded access program? So I wanted to point out there are very good resources on the MCW, IRB, and HRPP websites. And because I have difficulty finding them, I wanted to put them here. So this link at the top will take you to the policies. And then underneath, I don't think these hyperlinks work here, but Sarah helped me get this top one in here. But this is once you click on the top one, these are the policies that you will see. So then you can click on them. And then, as I mentioned, Kristen Bussey is the chair of IRB Committee 1 at MCW, Adult And so she reviews adult expanded access submissions. And then Scott Brooks, who I think joined. Thanks, Scott. You can contact him with questions. And then the pediatric equivalent of Kristen is Nathan Thompson. These are both pharmacists, by the way, so they're experts in multiple areas. So we're so thankful to have them. And then Jacob is the CRC2 for that committee, 8. And then on the children's side, we have a great team that works with us, and they would like, I'm sure, like me to remind you that if it is a child, if it's someone under 18, then please contact them first, because they work directly with MCW, IRB, and HRPP members, and they meet with them weekly. And so they will help shepherd this. So if you're taking notes, this is a place to take a note, is that if it's for a child under the age, well, under age 18, then please contact them. And they're very quick to respond. And here's some information that they would like to have when you contact them. However, I recommend, based on my experience, don't start an eBridge PRO before you talk with them, as they will kindly want to set up usually a Zoom meeting and talk through with you and the physician who wants to put this application into the FDA, talk through the details. And so you'll want to have the physician have their treatment plan, you're ready to present in brief, and so that you can have a meaningful, efficient discussion. And then I have the information for the CW Connect page here that has additional resources. Oh, and I don't want to forget to mention that they have developed in the past year a very helpful guide. So definitely read this guide before you have this meeting, because it's very helpful. It explains pretty much the order to go through for pediatric single patient INDs, how to go through the process with HRPP from children's, and then going on to the eBridge submissions. So this is a slide that shows emergency use versus patient treatment use. So these are both within expanded access. So emergency use is just what it says. I mean, maybe there's a drug right here on campus that's been developed, and there's enough research that shows in humans that shows that this might benefit the patient. Then, or it could be that the manufacturer can ship it quickly, and this is something that the patient needs it, or they're going to die, basically. So this is their last chance. So that is one way to get a drug for a patient that you couldn't get through a clinical trial. It's not on the market. The other one is non-emergent. So it's still the best. It's like the last opportunity or the best opportunity for this patient, but it's not as emergent. I decided to put together a flow diagram, and I realize this is small and you won't be able to see it real well, but this is the flow for walking through how from start to finish. And this is like from the coordinator's perspective. And I do have some disclaimers here that this is not an official MCW or Children's Wisconsin document. But this is basically the flow of how to go through the steps. And so first starting with the drug manufacturer. So let's say the physician asks you to help them process a single patient IND. First of all, I'd say if you haven't done it before, don't try to do it alone. Contact someone who's done it before. We've done it quite a few times here in the CTSI, CTO, and also Catherine has done it. And the Kristen Bussey, Nathan Thompson, and their folks that work with them have worked on it a lot. So I recommend you don't do it on your own, because it's apt to be a lot more problematic and frustrating for you. But these are basically the steps that I have come up with. And actually, how I started this was one of the publications that I have, which is over here. It has a similar flow chart, although the process is different here at our institution because of the policies we have. I mean, so the regulations, the FDA regulations are the same across the whole United States, but there are specific ways that our institution wants us to work through these workflows. So this document that I'm talking about is the one that's called Before It's Too Late, Multi-Stakeholder Perspectives on Compassionate, and then again, I would cross that out and say expanded access to investigational drugs for pediatric patients with cancer. So this was written during the height of COVID. So there were some really thoughtful thinkers who put this together. So there's a lot of things that I like about it. And so I took what they had and I made a few changes to it. And so for the emergency use route, you would start with the drug manufacturer, and then you would talk with the IRB, you'd talk with your investigational drug pharmacy, you'd talk with the chief medical officer if it's children's, you talk with the IRB chairs, probably, at least the coordinators. And then you're going to go down the left side of this. If that's emergency use, if someone needs it, like in 2 days or less, 3, and it's very important, do they meet the criteria? And that's where this flow is. Do they have to meet the criteria? So this is this big blue box. And both the Children's HRPP and the MCW IRB want to talk to the physician before they make any submission, just to make sure that the patient meets the criteria for the emergency use. And if they do, there's a yes here, and that's why the star is on this side. Then you're going to go down this route, and then you're going to tie in, if you need to check with OCRIC and making sure that all the billing things are going to work out right. And then you're going to come back down, and you don't have to submit the IRB protocol for an emergency use case until after the patient has been treated. But there's things you have to do within 5 days, and then you have to obviously do the reporting to the FDA. So this left side is for emergency use. The right side is for the expanded access single patient non-emergency. So
Hey, Marcia, I did have a question in the chat. Do you want to wait till the end? It's kind of just.
It's a good time. I think I'll just mention here, the next step thing I was going to do, and it is now 12, almost 12:30. Okay, so the next slide I'm going to be talking about is communicating with the drug manufacturer. So I'm kind of going to go through from the top here and go through the workflows now. So this is a good place.
Yeah, so there was a question about really just defining emergency versus the non-emergent. And the scenario in the chat is this person's applied for emergency INDs with the FDA, but obviously still needs to get the IRB approval. They're urgently ill, so they need the treatment ASAP because of their current treatment isn't sufficient, but it's not that they would necessarily die within a few days. So just wanted to get a better definition of emergency INDs versus the non-emergent.
Good. That brings me to my next slide. Thank you.
Perfect.
So here is what the FDA says about emergency use. So this situation that requires the patient to be treated before the written FDA submission can be made. So treatment is expected to have a rapid effect in resolving an acute clinical emergency. So it can be acute clinical emergency. It's not intended for chronic administration to slow progression of disease. Also, the patient needs to have a life-threatening condition that needs immediate treatment. No generally acceptable alternative treatment for the condition exists on the market. And there is no time to use existing procedures to obtain IRB and FDA approval for the uses. So that is, those are some of the criteria for emergency use. The authorization is needed, but you still need to have authorization from the FDA. It's a phone call. And then they will give you some written documentation. But then after the emergency use, after the treatment, the physician has to submit a written summary within 15 working days. Now, well, on the right here, it says that IRB approval before initiating emergency use treatment is not required. However, our IRBs, they are stating, yes, you must contact them ahead of time. It is important to contact them. You don't need to submit the protocol, but you must contact them, make them aware, and they want to partner with you. I think I have another slide. I thought I did. That had a few more criteria for emergency use. But if I don't, in the resources, there is really good workflows that MCW IRB has put together for them right here. And they are on the website. And I have them in the PowerPoint here. So I think it's the next slide. Yes, right here. So for adults, adult patients, read the emergency use criteria and flow diagram located here. And they look, they're basically 3 pages. And well, one of them is a cost recovery. So that's important, but you don't need to read that first. You need to read it soon after you read the other 2. So one of them is investigational drug use workflow, and the other one is investigational drug emergency use criteria. So the criteria are on here, and it's a nice flow diagram. It also has the IRB office contact on the flow sheet, and also I have it here, so there's a hotline, there's an after hours hotline that if it's true emergency, you can use that. And on the children's side, they have similar procedures. They do want you to reach out. You can send a quick email, and that response that is an auto response has Lori Rosh's after hours phone number. So if it is an emergency, you'll be able to reach someone in the children's HRPP office. When you contact them, though, please have your information ready to share, if you didn't already put it a little bit in the email. And then, as I said before, this guidance document that they have, that I believe I put that in the resources that are in box. That's an important document that you should have read, and the physician, you can shepherd them to look at it too. So I could pause there. Is there any more questions? So that was the emergency. That was the emergency use side. That is getting drug right away, either saving the patient's life or changing what can be a critical situation, life-ending situation quickly.
There aren't any questions in the chat, but if anybody does have any questions and you want to unmute yourself, you're welcome to do that also.
So maybe, yes, if anyone has any more questions about emergency use, that would be a good time. This would be a good time to ask them. Because I'm going to move on to the non-emergency single patient access.
Sounds like we can move on.
Okay, all right. So then I'm going back to this flow chart that I made. And so now I'm going to go down the right side. So again, the first thing you're going to do is contact the drug manufacturer. Make sure, or have the physician, sometimes they do that, and it's very helpful when they do, because then they can answer the questions directly. Talk with your IDS pharmacy. They're very knowledgeable about drugs that are coming to market, what they've been used for, how available they are. But so if the patient does not meet the emergency use criteria, then you need to go through the steps of going through the, submitting your IRB application and your FDA application request. And you have to have your FDA application request and approval before you can get IRB approval. But it goes very quickly. We turn these around usually in a week. We're talking 5 business days. And I'll show you next why it goes quick. There's a new portal, fairly new portal, and I think it's been evolving over the last 2 years that I've been working on this, because when I first tried to use it, or find out about it rather, it was very clunky, I thought, but it's working nicely. And the physicians that I work with, the physician needs to complete these forms, this electronic submission. And I will tell you why a little bit later. But if a physician has not done it before, but the coordinator is comfortable, or whoever's working with them, you can have a Zoom meeting and they can share the screen and you can walk them through it. So basically what it is, it's filling out the forms that you would fill out on, like a PDF, fillable PDF, and send off to the FDA, or fill out handwritten and fax it off like we used to do. It's filling it out electronically. Plus there's check boxes that just make it very smooth. So I'm going to show you next how to do this. So I highlighted, this is the actually the website. So if you want to go now and open it up, you can. And then it will walk you through the process. Now, as I said, it's going to be the physician that needs to actually complete this, because a non-physician or a physician who's not going to be the treating physician cannot do the attestation at the end. So let me back up. So at this point, I am not aware of a way that a coordinator or an assistant can fill out this form and then the physician come in and sign it. I've heard that once the physician has signed it, attested it, and sent it, then they may be able to give access. But if anyone else has learned that you can, let me know. Moving on. So this is the next screen one of the next screens you would get. So this is the information that you need to have collected before you fill this out. And when you're talking with the manufacturer, after you've told them, or the physician has sent a brief description of the treatment plan and the dose that they want to give, and the supporting documents of justification of why this is safe for the patient, safer than not having it, and that there's some probability that this might improve their condition. Then the drug manufacturer should send back either a letter of authorization that the FDA can refer to their IND. So they have a special new drug application number assigned to this drug. And the FDA does not feel comfortable looking into the manufacturer's documents for your single patient expanded access request unless the manufacturer has given this letter of authorization or equivalent. And I say equivalent because several of the manufacturers are not giving an actual official letter now, but they're giving the information that is equivalent. They're saying, yes, we will provide the drug provided that you have IRB approval, you have FDA approval, and they will give pictures of the drug. They will give information on stability and the concentration of the drug, the information that the FDA needs to resource, and also the IDS pharmacy, and then the IRB chair, who's also a pharmacist, may want to look at. So once you've collected this information, then you're ready to proceed further. And as a lot of these online forms go, you can assess your progress, how many more pages that you need to go through. But instead of filling out boxes on a form, and think of it like a FDA 1572 form, but it's not. It's a different one, which I have a picture of a little further down. This 3926 is the one that this mimics. So it's basically, you're filling out this form. The 3926 form was developed specifically for expanded access. So whether someone is filling out the hard copy form or filling out this form, you're filling out the same information. And so this is the part where if I was a physician, then I could proceed. I went in and I typed my information in just so I could see what I was going to see after this. But you'll see that I didn't, I get to that attestation and I stopped. So on this FDA 3926 form, the hard copy and also in this electronic version, there is a request for authorization to use the form. So you're basically, the physician would check off that they are requesting to submit this form to the FDA for this individual patient expanded access. But it's important to read this note. It says, just because you submitted it, it's not an authorization from the FDA. So you cannot proceed. This is for the, remember, the non-emergency. You cannot proceed with the treatment. You can't proceed with the emergency use either without the authorization. You've made the phone call. Remember, that's the emergency use part. But the non-emergency one, you can't proceed just because you've submitted the form. So this is actually the hard, this is a screenshot of the hard copy form. And I think Catherine and her group may still use this form. And when we, year and a half ago, our physicians were filling out this form as well electronically and sending it to by email to the FDA. So on the first page, go back. The first page basically some patient information, and then the second page, treatment plan, and sometimes there will be another because you need more room to write than this type. But you can put your treatment plan, you can load it. What's nice about the electronic version is you can upload your treatment plan. Now, if you look down here at the bottom, I think there's 10A and 10B. And those are the same checkboxes that the electronic version that I'm showing you has. So it's the same form. And this is the attestation page, which only the treating physician can sign. So this is electronically, that question 10B, that has to be checked. Because remember, if it's not checked, and I will remind the physicians, remember to check that box, because if that box is not checked and the FDA sends back the, they call it an acknowledgement, not approval letter. It's an acknowledgement letter, which means you can go ahead and proceed with your treatment. Then it will have to go through full committee, and probably minimum of 2 weeks or more. Not sure. So this is that certification statement that, and this actually, so if the FDA did not get back to the physician within 30 days, even if this was a non-emergency use, the physician could go ahead and treat if they had IRB approval. But as I said, the FDA, they turn their decision around usually within 2 business days. They're very efficient. I think it has improved over the last several years. So I guess I'll stop there. I have some additional tips that Kirsten and Blong and I here in the CTO have learned as a part of doing this. And so I've listed those here, but if you're not currently doing them, it may be too much information. Don't want to give you too much information overload. So I do want to thank a bunch of people for helping me help the physicians get the expanded access single patient IND authorizations from the FDA and approvals from the MCW IRB, so that these sick patients can get these potentially life-saving treatments. So now I will open it up to questions. And then I would like to ask, and I did before, Catherine, and then if Dr. Broglie joined, and anyone else who is experienced with submitting these single patient INDs, to please feel free to jump in and offer tips or answers or corrections, clarifications to things that if I said anything in error, please correct me.
I don't see any new questions in the chat, but agreed. If anybody wants to unmute and has any questions or wants to just share a bit of their experience with these, we always welcome that, and it's always helpful to hear.
Hi, this is Claire in infectious diseases. I just wanted to note that I had this experience when I filed my final submission to close out the IND that once you submit it, you cannot go back and edit it. You have to resubmit everything, but they just connect it between the IND numbers, but just be careful. Like,
Oh,
because
that's
sometimes
a good point.
they'll
Yes.
point out like they're like because I use like the same template, so they're like, well, why do you have two IND numbers in here? I'm like, oops, that was just an error on my part. So you have to resubmit it,
Okay.
which is annoying. So just
And
FYI.
are you talking about through the electronic portal?
Yes, I think the Cedar.
Yeah, the one that I showed you?
I've never submitted. Let's see, Cedar Next and Portal. That's the one I use to close out my INDs. I use a email to obtain an IND. I just email them and they give it to me, basically
Okay.
via email. So then I have to since I don't have an already established thing within the portal, the electronic portal, I have to do it create one just to close it out. And yeah, just
And so that's kind of
take a
problematic.
fine
Yeah.
tooth comb. Take a fine tooth comb when you just make sure
Uh-huh.
everything is correct, because even though they can connect them via the IND number, it's just there's a lot more back and forth. So that's all.
Okay. So hopefully this new portal will help solve that problem. I'll need to check with the physicians that some of them have closed out theirs, and I would need to think back in how they did it. I think is Dr. Broglie on the call?
I'm a coordinator and I was the one that closed out the IND. I just submitted it myself. So we just send the 3926 and the letter of authorization via email, and they give us the IND, and then I submit it through the portal to close. So
Okay.
I just need to have them. I use a hard copy of the 3926. So that's worked for me in the past. And I
All
just
right.
got an IND approval this past week. So
Okay.
yeah.
Well, that's good. That's good and I think it also may, as far as which way it's submitted, whether it's through the email or whether it's through the portal, may depend on which division of the FDA or which group you're working with. The oncology group, the oncology group, they were really encouraging the physicians to use this portal to do their submission. And perhaps it's so that when they upload their final report, then everything will, match up. And that does remind me, I did have a slide on what to do. That was another objective that I had, and I'm not sure what happened to that slide. Must be down here somewhere. Well, as far as closing out, you do have to close out these INDs. It's best practice to close them out as soon as you're done with the treatment, because that's, the physician will be on their mind still, and also, but they're at least at a minimum, you have to make a report to the IRB within a year of annual review. But most treatments, all the treatments that I've been working with have not gone beyond a year. There's some that go 6 months, maybe a little more than 6 months. So there is reporting. You also have to report adverse events that are possibly related to the treatment. And so that has to be reported promptly to the FDA. and I believe it's within 5 days. So I always remind the physicians, and in the letter that the FDA sends, they spell out, and that's what I thought I added to the PowerPoint, but I'm not seeing it now. I added screenshots of a letter. It didn't have any identifiers on it, but it shows the requirements of what the physician has to do. And then the IRB letter, it's important to read that closely too. So I will get those, the revision. I'll make sure the revision is in the box, the revised slide presentation, because I did last night, I took screenshots of a FDA acknowledgement letter that spells out exactly how soon reports need to be made for adverse events. And it's also in the regulations, but it's nice to see it very concise in those letters. So thank you. Thank you very much for bringing up that issue, that if it's submitted by email, then, and if the follow-up report is submitted through the portal, then you have to be very careful to make sure that the IND numbers match up. Any other questions?
Yeah, this is Claire again. I just wanted to confirm. So I guess I confused some of the terminology. So the humanitarian versus emergency, because I thought aren't those sort of the same thing?
Well, again,
Because-
humanitarian is not a term that compassionate use is not a term that's in the federal regulations. So,
Okay, because it's sort of some of these words are sort of used interchangeably. So even on our website, like our personal website
at
at
MCW,
yeah.
that might be something then that the IRB folks could speak to.
Yeah. Because like I guess I have experience with you treat the people and then notify, and and versus like emergency versus like somewhat emergency. So it's all there's a lot of weaving.
Yeah, and it could be that some of these terms have changed over time. But what I was reading in the government literature is that the term compassionate use, or the one you used, is not in the regulations. So it's best to use the terms that are in the regulations, and then there should be less confusion. So emergency use, it sounds like that's what you do. You process quite a few of these where the patient needs it right away to mitigate some acute clinical emergency.
And it looks like Jacob has a question or a comment.
Hi.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I'm Jacob Kroll. I work with Committee 8, the pediatric research, pediatric greater and minimal risk research. So for your the humanitarian terminology, typically that is when you have a device that you want to use on a single patient. So you want to be, I don't know if that helps, but when you're filling in your smart form for, for whatever purpose you want to use it for, Marcia's right. You definitely want to use the terminology for the specific type of drug or device. So if you have a drug, you want to use, treatment use or expanded access. Devices, it's almost always going to be humanitarian use device or HUD, and that would also route it a different way. I don't know. I don't know if Scott. I know Scott. He's also on this call. He's helped out a lot with this. If you had anything else you wanted to contribute to that, that'd be great.
Sure. So yeah, so compassionate use, a lot of times we see that terms with medical devices. So the terms interchange so much, but like Marcia said, it's not in the regs really. HUDs or humanitarian use are another form of device. Those are FDA approved, but they're just used so rarely that they fall under the HUD categorization. So we do have a separate kind of tree branching for HUDs. But for Claire's thing, so yeah, so if you have an emergency use situation, you treat the patient first and then deal with the IRB approval later. That's a very rare case. So most times you can get prospective IRB approval before treating the patient. So it's just, you can get an EIND, emergency IND, but still be a treatment use application. So not an emergency use situation, but your IND says EIND. So we've seen that occur and come through our office as well. So I don't know how that all plays out in the portal. That's not really my area. As far as how the FDA issues those two different terms, like a normal IND versus an EIND. But we will see that come through the treatment use pathway in either case.
Thank you. And the EIND, that stands for Emergency Use IND, I believe. And we did have one situation where I was assisting a physician to put a single patient oncology drug application through the IRB. And initially, the physician was going to go down the non-emergency use, but in her communications with the FDA, they said, well, this qualifies for emergency use. So they came back with an emergency use letter. So we right away, as soon as we got the letter, we sent it to the drug manufacturer and they shipped off the drug. So there was the potential that, and the IRB did tell us that, well, if you get the drug before, we have a chance to review this. I mean, you do have approval. The physician had approval to use it, but the IRB came back quickly and we actually got the IRB approval the day that the patient was going to be treated. So I think that's what Scott is maybe referring to there. Is that?
That's correct. Yeah. So things can change obviously on a clinical case. So you could start out thinking it's an emergency use situation and get that EIND, and something might change where you can actually get prospective IRB approval before needing to give the patient that drug. So then it doesn't come through emergency use on our pathway. It comes through as treatment use. So it can change like that.
Well, what I found is that the IRB chairs and directors and coordinators are all they prioritize these submissions. So they are our partners. So as my slide said, and I said, just reach out to them right away and they'll partner with you to help, as much as they can expedite these.
we are a little bit past the time. I know Catherine was gonna say something if she's still on the line. I think.
Sure. I was just going to talk about the importance of lots of good communication with the IRB from kind of the moment you know about these, because as long as you're communicating, there's often ways to work through challenges, say the patient's condition deteriorates or changes. So that communication is just really helpful throughout the whole process.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, unless there are any other questions, we appreciate you all staying on the line. I know it's past 1 now, so I think we'll conclude unless there's anything else, but you can also always reach out to Marcia, myself. We can get you in contact with the right people. There's a lot of great contacts, obviously, that you saw throughout the presentation. So,
Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.